goes Tim.
First off, thank y'all for bearing with me. The reason she's doing this, I have a doctor's appointment. I have a herniated disc right now, so I'm trying to get in and deal with that. So I also get to give a presentation in front of a bunch of hangry people. So thank y'all for dealing with me. I will be as efficient as I possibly can. My name is Tim Hardin. I am President of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. And today we're going to talk about economics. We're going to go back to school, go to Economics 101 and talk about how we got where we're at in our current economic state, why we have so many problems with woke corporations, and how do we resolve that. And so I'm going to skip over a few slides. I won't read this mission statement, but Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. We exist to provide transparency. Those who were here last night, we talked about the Fiscal Responsibility Index, scorecards, and just educating grassroots individuals to engage with government effectively. And so that's what we do as an organization. We are run completely by two different people, myself and Jeremy Kitchen. Together we have over 15 years of combined experience in the legislative body in Texas. And this is kind of a screenshot of our Fiscal Responsibility Index. And so if you go to texastaxpayers.com, this is what you're going to see. This is the latest one. Tony Tinderholt scored a 98. If y'all have not gone to texastaxpayers.com and checked out all of the free resources, I encourage you to do so. So let's kick it off and get this thing going so we can get to lunch. So I know I know that we've talked about the Overton window. Just a brief little tidbit. A lot of folks who are not or haven't been in politics for a very long time don't understand the significance of the Overton window. And I believe last night I think Fran was talking about how far the left has pulled the Overton window. And we have to understand its function and its importance on the right. And specifically when we're talking about economic issues, one of our main narratives is the elimination of property taxes. I believe that perpetual property taxes equates to paying rent to the government. This is not a one-time tax we pay. This is a tax on unrealized gains we pay over and over and over again. And when you die and your kids inherit your property, they will pay it their entire life. And when they die, their kids will pay it their entire life. It's an immoral tax, and it laughs in the face of private property rights. But there are people who will, obviously push back against that and say, hey, how are we going to fund this, or how are we going to fund that, or you can't do that. I get it, but let's just say it's not possible, right? Understand the function of not leading with compromise, right? This is something that Donald Trump was really good at, and his advice is we don't come to the table with our compromise. We come to the table asking exactly what we want. And what does this do? It pulls the Overton window. And what have we seen? We started talking about this in the summer of 2021. And we went to the Republican Party of Texas convention. If any of y'all were there, I don't know if y'all remember those big red axes where we had axe the tax if you were there. And so we passed out 5,000 of those. And I have drummed this for a year and a half straight. If you were paying attention, Greg Abbott, in his debate with Beto, his last thing he said was, my goal is to eliminate school property taxes and to get y'all to stop paying rent to the government. Verbatim. This is exactly what I've been saying. So we're seeing penetration of this narrative. And then we went through the session. We kept just asking for the whole thing. The second called special session. Does anybody know what it was called over? It was called elimination of school property taxes, compressing tax rate so we can actually own our home. And so in a year and a half, pulling that Overton window to the right, did we get on a path to elimination? No, but things take a while in politics. You learn it takes 2 to 3 legislative sessions to get something done. So in a mere year and a half, our organization, partnered with 1 or 2 other fiscal organizations, has taken this from outside the window when no one would even consider talking about this to the governor himself, not only parroting what we're saying, but calling a special session for the elimination of property taxes. And so that's an accomplishment, and that is just an example of how we can use the Overton window to our example. And yes, we're going to continue talking about it. And yes, my life goal is to get us to actually own our property and to eliminate property taxes altogether. That's another talk. Talk to me about it afterwards. So today we're going to talk about communism, socialism, capitalism, and so government overreach and the markets. And of course, we have Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, who was responsible for that main narrative that really kind of spawned our economic growth in the U.S. And then, of course, Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto. And so I studied philosophy and political science in my undergrad. I have a biblical studies master's as well. But in philosophy, what I learned was definitions are important. And so anytime I talk about something, I want to talk about definition. This is not an official definition. This is something I've come up with, kind of an amalgamation of a lot of definitions. But this is my definition of capitalism. An economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than the state. And so let's talk about the history of capitalism. So Adam Smith, he writes The Wealth of Nations in 1776. That year should ring a bell. That is the exact year we declared independence, right? And so the government interference, or his idea is government interference in the market stifles competition and economic growth. This introduced laissez-faire policy into many capitalist nations, including the United States. And so what is laissez-faire policy? It is a French word that means allow to do. And so this is policy that allows for things to take their natural course without interference. This is the core idea behind pure capitalism. Let me give an example where laissez-faire policy could have really helped us. Do we remember all the lockdowns? We remember COVID? We remember those dissenting voices that were being silenced. And what did they say about like the Spanish flu? Pandemics take a natural course. We have a big, huge wave. We have a follow-up wave and another wave after that. What did the government do? They did not practice laissez-faire policy. They did not allow the natural course of a pandemic to roll itself out. They shut down, they locked down, they put people out of business. Guess what ended up happening? One big wave, another little wave, and then another wave after that. So despite all of the devastation and destruction from government intervention, we still had the exact same outcome. Had we just allowed things to do what they were going to do during the pandemic, we could have saved, honestly, a lot of lives, a lot of businesses, and a lot of capital. And so this is just one example. I could give many, many more. This laissez-faire policy requires three things. It requires capitalism, a free market economy, and a rational market theory. And so I'm sure you're kind of familiar with the first two. I want to talk about rational market theory real quick. And this is a extreme oversimplification of this. But a critique of this was actually the market is always right. But in much the same way that like a derogatory term or phrase, Christian for early Christians was a derogatory term. It was little Christs, right? Well, we've adopted that. Well, in the same sense, the market is always right. Well, it's a critique, but yeah, that's right. The market is always right. The market determines the correct price for a good or service. Unmanipulated supply and demand dictate what a fair price of a service or product is. And so you see the little graph here, right? As you know that supply and demand have this inverse relationship. The more of a supply we have, the less of a demand, and vice versa. And that equilibrium is right there in the middle. And that is how a free market is supposed to work. We can get distortion when we have actors like governments come in picking winners and losers. And so let's ask y'all a question. Why is competition good for an economy? You can answer.
Because it will drive out, for lack of a better term, the losers.
Yeah.
The less economic, and it will less efficient, and then it will produce more of the more efficient and the better products.
So weeds out bad companies, keeps good companies and or products. That's one. What else? What else is competition good for? Yes, sir.
Promotes innovation.
Innovation, good. Yes.
Price is reasonable.
It keeps prices down. That's right. What else?
Service up.
Service up. Okay. Anything else? Jobs. Creates jobs. That's right. That's right. So y'all nailed most of these. So by increasing competition, we increase supply of products and services, thereby lowering prices. As supply goes up, right, demand will go down, meaning when we have a lot of choices, the price ends up going down. it increases the need for innovation, improving products and services, meaning if I make a widget and we have other people who wants to make a widget, if they can make a cheaper, more efficient widget, we're going to get that product improved just by pure competition. No need for intervention from the outside. Weak and inefficient companies are put out of business, raising the bar for the market. Instead, we have an example is, if you remember the bailouts from the Great Recession, had the government not intervened, General Motors probably would have gone out of business or had to declare bankruptcy, and many, many others. And it creates inefficiencies in the economy when the government puts themselves into the market like that. My best example, and this isn't a perfect example, is cell phones versus medicine. And so I don't know, a lot of y'all are probably iPhone users. I'm actually one of those weird Android users that ruins your chats and then turns all the chats green or blue or whatever it is. But we have the flip phones are back, right? And so I really like this little phone because I don't break the screen on it. But if you look at regulation, and yes, cell phones and communication is regulated, but you have to look at regulation of cell phones versus medicine, for instance. There is much, much stronger regulation in the medical industry than there is in the cell phone industry. And so we've had a lot of innovation in computers and technology in the last 10 years. If you think about that first iPhone versus what's going on out there right now, we have just exponentially grown in product and even price if you add in inflation. Medicine, on the other hand, I am, not only do I have a herniated disc, I'm also a diabetic. And so I have lots of medical problems. And so my father was also a diabetic. And so my father was type 1. I've been diagnosed with a one called LADA, which is I'm in that lucky 5% of weird diabetics. We won't go into that. But the point is, I remember when I was a child, watching him prick his finger, right? And take his blood sugar. I'm sure some of y'all maybe are type 2s in here. I'm sure you have to do the exact same thing. And when I was first diagnosed, they didn't diagnose me correctly. But I remember this was in the 80s when he was diagnosed. And then I got diagnosed and I realized, oh, I'm doing the exact same thing. We are now almost 40 years and we're still pricking. Now, I will say recently I have this little magical thing right here on my arm, right? But in 40 years, that's about all we've come up with, right? It's the same function. We have made very little progress on solving diabetes. I think they're getting close now, but the point I'm trying to make is you cannot convince me that if we gave someone like Elon Musk the task of, hey, will you cure diabetes, and just said, government, step completely out, let him do what he does, you cannot convince me that he wouldn't have this thing wrapped up and solved in 5 years or less. Yep. It's the FDA, it is the government regulation. The price of insulin is a direct result of regulation in the market. If insulin was made available to be competitive, insulin costs almost nothing to produce. And so if we had millions of different companies making this, we would have very cheap insulin and we would have a better product and service serving folks who are diagnosed with certain conditions. So,
isn't that what Bill Gates wants to do?
Oh yes, that is exactly what Bill Gates wants to do. And he wants us to eat bugs, right? It was funny, I live in Fort Worth and I went into a gas station and I saw a package of crickets the other day. Oh boy. In like the candy section. And I'm like, who is buying this, right? But I took a picture of it and I posted it on, I'm like, I can't believe, and they're starting to put like cricket powder in products. So anyways, that's the rabbit trail. Y'all know how bad I am at that. So, summary of capitalism. Here's my simple summary. Government controls are bad and the free market is good. Okay, good. Socialism. So a lot of times we hear socialism or socialist, and the term is misused a lot in modern day America, and we're told that this is actually a form of government. But it is actually not. If you look at the definition, the original definition of socialism, and even the end goal of modern day socialism, what socialism is, my definition, is a transitional state, and this is Marx's definition as well, a transitional social state between the overthrow of capitalism and the realization of communism. It is not a form of government, and it is not an economic system. It is a transitional state. Now, we've been in a transitional state of socialism for a very long time, but communists don't care how long it takes. The goal is to get us from a pure free market, which we no longer have, to a purely controlled communist system, which we are rapidly going very quickly to, okay? So let's talk about the history of socialism. So the first idea I found, and this isn't, knock me a little bit on this, but this isn't exactly socialism, but if you read Plato's Republic, some of y'all might have, if you're English majors in philosophy, reread it. And so his overall idea was this society or this caste system that philosopher kings, I'm sure you've heard this phrase before, philosopher enlightened people, an oligarch, would make decisions for a whole society on who should do what, and it's a complete system of control. And he saw this as the best form of government in his republic. And so flash forward to modern socialism, which is probably something we're more familiar with. And this comes directly from the Communist Manifesto. And the theme of the book, if I had to condense it in a sentence, is the history of all existing society is the history of class struggles. This is a quote pulled from the book. And when we think about class struggles, think about modern day America. And this used to be kind of economic, but now what have they turned it into? Race. They've turned it into social status, and still economic status. And so the goal is to divide up society into these different classes and then pit them against one another. I won't get into kind of what he calls for, but he eventually calls for the proletariat revolution. A revolution has to occur before you can actually overthrow capitalism. But the book includes how capitalism would be replaced by socialism first, and then you move towards communism. The last paragraph of the book calls for the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Communism has caused some of the most brutal tragedies in history. If you look at the famous communists, they have a body count so insanely high. Stalin, Lenin, Hitler. We were talking last night, right, about Hitler. Hitler's body count was like this compared to Mao and Stalin. And so the vast majority of communists and the communist ideology is atheist in nature. Okay, they despise the Christian ethic, and the goal is to make everyone homogenous. The reality is, by human nature, we end up working out the upper class is ultimately the government in socialism or communism, and the lower class is ultimately the worker. And so, I don't know if you've ever read the Communist Manifesto, but I wanted to go through, I'm sure you've heard of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. And so we're going to talk about those 10 planks, and I want you to be thinking in your head, which one of these apply to our government right now? How many of these have they successfully implemented? Because we're talking 1800s, right, when the Communist Manifesto was written. So the first one is the abolition of private property in land and application of all rents of land to public purpose. No private property. Where would we see that today?
Eminent domain.
Pushing it.
UN, right? So Agenda 21, which has become something else now. What else?
Eminent domain.
Eminent domain. Where else?
Property tax?
What did we just talk about? Property taxes, right? If you think you own your property, I encourage you to do one thing. Stop paying your property taxes. You could have paid for 30 years straight. Do you know how many days you have to be in deferral, according to Texas statute, in order for them to place a lien and foreclose on your house? Any guesses? How many days?
30?
Nope. Nope.
7?
Nope. One. One. Now, ultimately, the foreclosure is up to the local government, your county, but according to state statute, it is only 1 day that's required, and yes, we have examples of people having foreclosure put on them after 1 day of deferral. Ultimately, that's going to come down to your local government, which is why local government's important, but it is terrifying that we can own our property outright, have no mortgage, but if you don't pay your yearly rent payment to the government, they will come and they will take your property and they will sell it to somebody else who will pay them rent. And so if you don't think that that is a direct assault on private property rights, let's have a conversation after this speech. We also have a heavy, progressive, and graduated income tax. Does anybody know when we got the income tax in America? Any guesses?
36.
19...
20, 30,
No, 18.
So 1913-ish. So there's a lot of big movement right around that, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But we do have a graduated income tax. The good news is in Texas, a lot of states have income tax as well. We put in place a constitutional amendment preventing an income tax, meaning it's almost going to be impossible for them to undo that now that it's in our Constitution. So unless we have an insane leftist wave that takes 2/3 of our legislature over and the population would vote this out, we're pretty much safe from an income tax in Texas. So that's good news. That's a good reason to be a Texan. Ann Richards, yep, she did. But we fortunately have made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot to be made. The abolition of all rights of inheritance. The confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. Let me stop on this one. Do you know that right now, still, years later, there are still dozens and dozens of people locked up in D.C. from January 6th? Guess what they are being called? Domestic terrorists, rebels, okay? What are they calling us when we go to school board meetings and we talk about the dirty books? Do you know what the FBI has labeled us? Domestic terrorists, okay? And so this is why, a domestic terrorist, right? So this is why this is important. Because if you're labeled a domestic terrorist or a rebel or an insurrectionist, what they're saying is you have no part in our society, and we're going to either take away your freedom or take away your property or both. And so understand that this is an incremental system and we are moving towards, I'll give you a $5 word, there's a teleology, a teleological goal, and that's just meaning there's an end purpose, there's an end goal in mind to socialism, and it is communism, it is the abolition of private property, it's the abolition of your freedom, and we have been marching slowly for about really 100 years, I would say, towards this goal. We also have the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. Who's our national bank? The Federal Reserve. Is the Federal Reserve federal?
No.
No. Okay, y'all are smart people, right? It is a private bank. We call them the banksters, right? And so guess when this was created? 1913. Wow, what a coincidence. We have an income tax and the Federal Reserve being created right around the same time. That's something to think about. And just a little bit more on that. So I'm sure you've heard that we have a central bank digital currency coming. Yep. Okay, if you don't know what this is, if you've heard of Bitcoin and all of this, they're using the same concept to create a central currency to basically create a cashless society. It got implemented, I believe, in July. And so these little digital coins exist, and these are programmable, meaning they can turn it off. Meaning if you have a bad social credit score, then things will either cost you more money or you will not be able to attain certain goods and services. And so you're seeing they're continuing to march forward. So we need sound money. I don't know if y'all have heard of BRICS or not. Yes. And so those who have heard of BRICS, they're meeting in August to move away from the dollar, fiat currency. They're moving away from the petrodollar. They have created what they're hoping will be the new global reserve currency, which is gold-backed. And so what that's going to do, if they actually are able to implement that, it's going to be really bad news for us in America. We are going to be devastated because we run on fiat currency. We're $33 trillion in debt. And honestly, all the other countries are tired of the US and our fiat currency and how we just print more money, And so we need to really start thinking about getting back to sound money, both on the state level. There's bills that are still being introduced to give Texas the ability to create sound money. I would highly encourage you to support that. And we should be calling for our own government to stop with this nonsense CBDC and put us back on a gold standard with a gold-backed dollar. Okay, I'll answer those in a minute, I promise. So next, let's get through the rest of these. So centralization of the means of communication and transportation at the hands of the state. Understand this was a very long time ago when he came up with these 10. But of course, we have the FDA. I think not the FDA, excuse me, the FCC. And we have what's happening right now with Facebook and the internet. We have the government not necessarily coming through themselves and silencing people, but through subsidies and through buying off companies saying, hey, we're going to highly encourage you to cancel all these people who are talking about vaccines, who are talking about the lockdowns, who are talking against the government, or we're going to pull the hundreds of millions of dollars that we give you from the government, which is why, yet again, government intervention is a bad thing. They're getting smarter and they're not being as overt on how the government cancels us. They're using conduits, Google and Facebook, to silence us. And this is, yet again, a correlation with number 6 here. So we have the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of soil. This is a little bit dated. As y'all know, much of our manufacturing has moved overseas. This is something that Trump was trying to make progress on, bringing manufacturing back. And of course, another thing is during the COVID pandemic, who makes all of our medicine? China. And so this is a bad thing. It's not a direct correlation. This is a little dated because this is during the Industrial Revolution, and so society works a little bit differently. 8, the obligation of all to work, establishing industrial armies. I would argue that we're actually going the opposite way on this one, right? Like, so now we have AI and we have robots, and what are they talking about? Actually, we don't want you to work. We'll put you on UBI. Does anybody know what UBI is? Universal Basic Income. And so the more they can get robots to replace truckers and things like that, they can then just pay people off with $2,000 a month. And when the government provides you food and everything you need to survive, how much control are you going to have over your government? And so this is something, yet again, technology has kind of changed the goal of this one. 9 is the combination of agriculture and manufacturing, a gradual abolition and distinction between town and country by more equitable distribution of population of the country. We just mentioned Agenda 21. And so what are we doing? It's called by something different now. I can't remember what it is, but essentially they're moving people from the country to the city and centralizing smart cities, like 15 minutes, right? I heard 15-minute cities. And so this is a city where everything you need is within 15 minutes. And I'll tell you a funny story. So recently, we are in a suburb in Fort Worth, but we're micro homesteaders. And so we have a little garden and we have some chickens. So we have 6 chickens. And I was thinking the other day, you know, these chickens, they have a coop, they have water, they have food. We take care of them when they get hurt. They have a little 15-minute city right there. Now, they can't get out of the backyard, and I kind of keep them trapped there, but they do have their own little 15-minute city. And this is exactly the same reason that the government wants us in 15-minute cities, because they want us trapped. If they want to lock us down, they want us in a centralized location so they can put a border around us. And so we are right now looking to push on out, probably to the Weatherford area, maybe down here in Granbury, I don't know. Mineral wells, even further out. I've been told that by multiple people. So we are right now considering it. I'm in the middle of remodeling my house, but I'm seeing the writing on the wall, and so I'm trying to get out of the city and give myself a little space between me and the government. So last one is free education for all children in government schools. Why would they want to control education?
We just heard it.
Give me your children, and I don't need anything else, right? We've had many dictators say this. And this, the left's takeover of education, both at the primary level and at the higher ed level, we have seen the fallout from that, and we're just now, honestly, 50, 60 years later, waking up to this reality as conservatives, and they are so far gone, so far gone. This started really, yet again, to kind of bring up stuff I studied as a philosophy major. John Dewey, we talked about him last night, Bertrand Russell. These were philosophers that brought in ideas that were ultimately implemented by other folks within the government. And the idea is simply to pull children away from the family unit and put them in a classroom, and then the government becomes their new mother and father. And so this is why the concept of school choice is so important. I understand that not everyone has the same ability, and so we, at least as parents, should have the choice to homeschool our kids, to private school our kids, or if you want to send them to a government school, more power to you. If you don't, yeah.
To abolish property tax.
Amen. Amen. So we homeschool all 5 of my kids, and if y'all don't know this, Texas has the freest homeschool rules in the entire nation. My wife runs a homeschool co-op, which is a little organization where we teach kids, it's like 1 day a week, and they come and they learn different things, like electives basically. And we have so many families move from other states, and they are so confused and blown away at how Texas works, because they'll come here and say, okay, who do we need to report to? Nobody. What test do we got to take? You don't have to take any tests. And they're like, okay, so what do we do? It's like, whatever you want. It's absolutely amazing. Isn't freedom amazing? And so when school choice legislation is being debated here in a couple months in that special session, one of my biggest fears is the strings attached if they're going to include homeschooling. So I would highly encourage y'all, especially if you have people who homeschool in here or kids who homeschool, we don't want the government to get their grubby hands on homeschooling in Texas. And so, and if they do, I want no strings attached. Me personally, I don't even trust them, so just stay out. Y'all do private and public, but you just leave the poor little homeschoolers alone. That's my take on it. So be wary. The government wants to educate our kids because they actually don't want to educate, they want to indoctrinate. Indoctrinate, right? So, regulation. It picks winners. It picks winners and losers through subsidies. Okay, this is bad. This is the exact opposite of competition. So when the government is picking winners and losers, it comes in and it screws up the market, and it distorts prices. It makes things more inefficient, and education is a perfect example of that. Texas is kind of down at the bottom of really all educational outcomes, and we just keep pouring more and more. There is this sentiment that, oh, we're underfunded in Texas. That is not true. They have so much money, they're buying private planes and golf courses. As a matter of fact, Granbury, right, got caught with a private plane. They were using the private plane to go out and fly to private or to a vacation. There you go. And so if that's not government waste, I don't know what is. It stifles competition, regulation through regulation and barriers to entry. So I work for TFR. I'm the president of TFR. As you can imagine, working for a nonprofit is not the most amazingly profitable thing in the entire world. So I've always had a second or even third job. I own a construction company. I've been an insurance adjuster, real estate agent, all kinds of stuff. But specifically in construction, I started off doing roofing. You know, those annoying guys that come and knock on your door when hail happens. I was one of those guys in my early 20s. Ended up finally opening my own company. But it's a relatively unregulated industry in Texas, which is both good and bad, right? With the lack of regulation, it allows people, there's a lower barrier to entry. And so I was able to come in as a 24-year-old man and start my own business with relatively pretty much ease. I just had to have the know-how. Now, when it comes to licensing and regulation, working in the legislature, do you know who is the biggest lobbyist and advocate for the licensing and regulation of really any industry? It is the people who are already in that industry. Do you know, so the plumbers, the electricians, and the people who are still pushing a roofing license, who are the biggest spenders? It's the biggest companies that are in there are pushing for the licensing and regulation. Why? Because they don't want the competition. They don't want the competition. And so the money doesn't lie, follow the dollars. And of course, regulation suppresses innovation with bureaucracy and produces fascistic policy. And we have good old Mussolini here, which this famous quote, he said, fascism should be more appropriately be called corporatism, because it is the merger of state and corporate power. What are we seeing? I just mentioned Facebook and Google and the merger of the state and corporations. This is exactly what we're seeing. So all of those people who are anti-fascist, who are parroting corporate narratives, they're the actual fascists, right? And so it's an inversion. It's 1984 doublespeak is what's going on. But we are having a fascist revolution in America as well. So socialism summary, free market bad, government controls good. So question, what is the USA today? What are we? Any guesses?
Oligarchy.
Oligarchy, that's a good guess. What else? Socio-fascist, not a bad guess either. The real answer is I don't know. I can tell you what the experts call us. They call us a mixed economy. Okay, so we exhibit characteristics of socialism and capitalism. Government controls or partially controls many goods and services. The market is heavily regulated, and we have lots and lots and lots of taxes. And so what that translates to me is we're in the midst of socialism, right? We're headed towards communism, and every day we get closer and closer, although I'm very, very encouraged in the last year what we've been doing as conservatives, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So some economic socialist policies in the U.S. I have a lot on this list. Don't take offense if you benefit from some of these. I'm just trying to point out ideologically what is funded through our taxes, right? And so we have Social Security, right? Welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, minimum wage, public schools, public universities, food stamps, public hospitals and parks. Not saying these things are bad. I'm just saying, you know, they are technically socialist programs. Public libraries, heavy corporate subsidies. If y'all did not know, we just passed the largest corporate welfare program in the history of Texas this last go round. It was a renewal. I talked about it a little last night. 313 abatements where they abated 90% of property taxes of these woke corporations, where we got dead last, right? They took 2 special sessions for them to do anything for us. They took care of them corporations right off the bat because they have lobbyist friends who help them do that. So we Federal Reserve Bank, CPS, occupational licenses, we could go on and on and on. It was hard for me to think of capitalist policies in the U.S. And so most of these are like, take it with a big grain of salt because they're not really purely capitalistic. Private property rights, we already discussed that. Do we really have them? Well, yeah, kind of, but not really. Private and homeschooling. Homeschooling, I would say, hey, we're doing great in Texas on that. Private school is in jeopardy depending on what form school choice takes. Churches and charities, you know, you can push back on all of these. I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard the IRS 501c3, the dangerous language in there that prevents like pastors and labels it as hate speech. And you can actually take away C3 status of churches. A Houston mayor actually, I think, tried to subpoena some sermons not too long ago. And so that is in current code, and there is the danger there. I haven't seen, we saw in COVID some disturbing things with churches. There's a few who have had C3 status taken away, but understand it's a possibility. And when they want to implement it, they can, according to current cryptocurrencies. Whether you feel how you feel about crypto and Bitcoin, up until very recently, it was the wild, wild west. It was very, very free. And yeah, there's a lot of people taking advantage of each other. This is how freedom works. Like, you get less security, but recently they are now coming down and regulating and then trying to spin us into this CBDC. Unregulated parts of the internet, I wouldn't recommend you go there. They're pretty gross, but they exist. Cosmetic products for some reason. I don't know why, but whoever the cosmetic lobbyists are, they're doing a fantastic job. There is very, very little regulation on cosmetic products in the U.S. I can't explain why, but just found out in my research. AM radio, of course, you can get out there and broadcast your own if you want. Gun ownership, of course, we have some limitations there, but we did recently pass constitutional carry, something that my office worked on 3 sessions in a row, and then Schaefer finally got it across the board, so we have the restoration of rights. We have more to go, but we're moving in the right direction. As a matter of fact, constitutional carry is getting passed all over the U.S., so we're actually headed in the exact opposite, the good direction in the U.S. in the restoration of Second Amendment rights. And then the nutritional supplement market. If you buy supplements, I'm sure you see, this is not approved by the FDA. I'm surprised that they've held up for as long as they have, but there has been attempts by the FDA to regulate supplements, and I'm sure they're going to keep trying. But for the most part, there's a lot out there because new innovations keep happening, new supplements keep happening, keep getting created, and so we still have some out there that are very lightly regulated.
Big Pharma's been trying to kill it.
Absolutely, absolutely. They are. You talk about lobby money, and Big Pharma's got more than anybody. So how do we get here? So quick little history. So Woodrow Wilson reduces tariffs. This is in the early 1900s. The government has a shortfall of income. And then we pass the Income Tax Amendment in 1913. This legalizes the plunder of citizens' income. The Federal Reserve Bank is brought into existence in the same year, 1913. Have any of you ever heard of the book, what is it, The Creature from Jekyll Island? Okay, wonderful book. If you're homeschoolers, we read our kids a book called The Tuttle Twins. Have you ever heard of the Tuttle Twins? It's an amazing series, and they have a little like condensed version of that called The Creature from Jekyll Island. They talk about sound money. If you're in, even if you're not in homeschooling, if you just want to have a good curriculum that talks about like economic policy and limited government, highly recommend the Tuttle Twins. They have all kinds of books that deal with a lot of stuff simplified down to grade level, and they're awesome. I can't talk enough about them. We have literally every book that they've ever written.
And they have them elementary to high.
That's right. And they're getting more and more better every single year. And so go check them out. Beginning of Fiat Currency. What? They're getting, that's right. I was public school. So
Your kids wouldn't say
that's good. They probably would, but.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's right. It's the back. It's got to be the back. And my blood sugar's getting high. I can't. So they've been slowly moving us away. They slowly moved us away from the gold standard, finally ending under Nixon in 1973. We went completely fiat, which means basically the value of our dollar is subjective. It's basically based on the amount that's in circulation and things like our military might, the petrodollar. There's a lot of variables that come in there, but ultimately.
IRS came in 1913 as well.
Oh, well, man, I need to add that to the presentation. So, well, of course, to collect the income tax, right?
Well,
And so
they're the thugs for the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Man, that was a bad year. Bad year for America.
Yeah.
So currency, of course, is not worth the paper it's printed on. We need Woodrow?
Woodrow Wilson.
Yes.
He's the one who started all
Yep. Hooray. Let's talk about another wonderful president, the New Deal. FDR, he had a response to the Great Depression that I would argue is caused from everything that happened in 1913. You flash forward a couple of decades, the whole thing collapses on itself. So what's the solution when the government causes a problem? More government. We cause the problem, and then we bring the solution. We cause more problem, bring the solution. I'm sure you've heard of something called the Hegelian dialectic. This is another, Hegel was another philosopher we read. We won't get into that. So FDR believed government interference would save the economy. He introduced an economic theory that is opposed to the Austrian school. Okay, and basically it just means that we're for the government intervening, and the government is there to save the economy. These new policies came in 3 waves, and I won't read all these for time's sake. We're getting there, y'all. We're almost there, I promise. So the New Deal, essentially, this is a ton of subsidies and regulations. And so in the first wave, we had the Banking Act. It closed banks. We abandoned the gold standard, or started the abandonment of the gold standard. Lots and lots of farm subsidies, which still right now, the farming industry is one of the most heavily subsidized industries. And so the government has massive control. We won't get into Bill Gates and everything he's doing with farming. Yeah, I'm sure most of y'all by the size, y'all already know. So we have the Gold Reserve Act, which prohibited private gold ownership, and they actually confiscated gold from people. The National Housing Act, Federal Communication Act, and then we had a second and third wave. Lots and lots more farm subsidies. We had the Social Security Act. We had the United States Housing Act, and like I said, lots and lots more farming subsidies. So over the next 100 years, we continue to suffer from New Deal thinking. If you remember just a few years back, the New Green Deal, they're still pushing this idea and piggybacking on the idea of the New Deal. The more an industry is regulated, the less competition we have, the more barriers to entry. Monopolies are actually created through regulation. And again, that's another conversation. We can have it afterwards. This kills small businesses. And this is, of course, the government picking winners and losers. And so why does government overreach continue? I'm sure we've all heard this famous quote from Benjamin Franklin. He who would trade liberty for some temporary security deserves neither liberty or security. Okay, and so this, yet again, we have this relationship between liberty and responsibility. This is why America is great, because, with more freedom, bad things are going to happen. This is part of life. Okay, and so why did many of the founders say that we need a moral and Christian society to be able to hold up this amount of freedom? Right. Because if we don't have any kind of virtue behind liberty and freedom, what do we get? Well, look around. Yeah. Look around at our society right now. We have moral decay. We're falling into chaos, and there's too much freedom for an ungrounded civilization to bear its own weight. And so we're seeing the results of the government coming in and continually providing security, people being ungrounded in any kind of ethic, any kind of Christian morality, and a worldview of subjectivism and relativism falling in on its own weight. We're literally watching the collapse of our republic. And so liberty and responsibility are directly correlated. With more liberty, we require more responsibility, and the reverse is true. The less freedom we have, the less responsibility, which is why we have all these young people that are entitled. And I'm showing my age. I just turned 40, and so like the older I get, I'm like, these kids, these young kids. They were saying it about me in my generation, but I'm with you now. I'm with you. So Texas and America simply have chosen security over liberty. And so finally, though, the problem of woke corporations. So we have a new trend in corporations pushing leftist ideology. My birthday month is June, and so I get this wonderful blessing of the rainbows everywhere. They've stolen the Christian symbol, right, and they have applied it to debauchery, right? And so we actually saw some pushback this last go around, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But essentially, this is made possible through fascism, through merging of corporate and government interests. All of these corporations receive corporate welfare, and this is the new strategy to suppress freedom. So it's not the overt Nazi, hey, we're going to come, that 1984 neck, boot on the neck. This is them, coercing corporations and being sneaky. So hey, we're not locking you guys down, or we're not saying you have to take this vaccine. You just can't work for any of these jobs if you don't, and you can't do this. And what they're doing behind the scenes is saying, hey, you better do this, or we're going to pull your funding. And so this is the new way in which they're putting a system of control over us. And so we have to be aware of woke corporations. This is a direct result of fascism and the merging of corporations and government. And so how do we win? Let's be positive. So how do we win? So if you remember, I have the Governor DeSantis signs the bill revoking Disney's special district status. Okay, we push back. That's how we win. We push back. We let our dollars vote. Okay, if y'all remember, Bud Light, we bankrupted them, right? Yeah. We have Target. Bud Light and Target have lost billions and billions of dollars. CMT, there's one new every day. And so we do have the power. Conservatives have been really bad in the past at boycotts, but we're being more and more encouraged as we put these bad actors out of business. So I would encourage you, understand when you buy things from people, you are voting with those dollars. Stop giving money to people that hate you and hate our worldview. Stop. If you haven't heard of Public Square before, I would highly encourage you. This is an app you can download on Android or iPhone, and this essentially has millions of businesses that affirm a pro-America, pro-Christian values pledge. And so you can identify local businesses who agree with our values and then go give them your money. Don't give these corporations that hate you your money. We want them to collapse on their own weight. That is how we're going to defeat this. And of course, we have the weaponization of the Department of Justice. We have, the raid on Trump, right, who was unprecedented, right? We've never had a former president been raided like that before. Trump had declassification power, and so he did nothing wrong. And now we have all of these indictments coming out. We just had Georgia come out. And so we know through whistleblowers on the inside, the goal is to get secretaries of state to take him off the ballot. Yeah. That is the goal. That's why they're doing this. All of these trumped up indictments are there just to make things really toxic. So ultimately, whether or not they actually can criminally prosecute him or not, the goal would be, don't let people vote on him, because he has been very explicit about what he's going to do. If you want my opinion, I'm surprised they haven't JFK'd him yet. And I'm actually really fearful, but it doesn't seem like he really cares. Yeah, and so, and speaking of prayer, right, whether or not you love or hate Trump or whatever, you have to understand, if you don't think that, God's in this and he can't use whoever he wants, you're wrong. Name one other president that got 3 judicial appointments in the history of the U.S. What happened because of those? Roe v. Wade was overturned as a direct result. So, God called Cyrus my servant. Okay? God can use whoever he wants. And so I won't speak for anyone's personal morality, but understand that one, God's still in this, and that we need to be praying for our leaders, because we're not told to pray for the good leaders. We're told to pray for our leaders. We should be praying for Joe Biden as Christians, okay?
East in the Middle East.
Yeah. Speaking of Joe Biden, I like this picture because who decided to put, what staffer is like, hey, we should make you look like a Nazi up there, as he yelled and called us domestic terrorists. Y'all remember that speech? It was one of the most amazing, crazy speeches I've ever seen.
CGI.
Yeah, it is wild. And so we're winding it down, y'all. How do we fight back? One, I'm a big fan of the 10th Amendment. Okay, state sovereignty, strong states is how we fight the federal government. Yes, you can elect all the congressmen you want. I'm of the opinion that place is lost. We need to have a strong state government. We need more DeSantis's. We need more people who are going to push back hard against the federal government and assert state sovereignty. They don't have enough federal agents to come in and enforce all of this stuff. If we decided as Texas, we're going to secure a border, we're going to build a wall, what are you going to do about it? They won't do anything about it. They'll sue us in court, they'll do all this different stuff, but if we have a strong governor and strong members to say, too bad. Yeah. What are you going to do about it? This is what Colorado did with weed, by the way, right? They said, we don't care. We're legalizing it. And then guess what happened? All of these other states legalized as well. It is still on the books as a class 1, right? And we're not talking about whether you like it or hate it. I'm just saying, I'm using an example that by nullification of federal laws, this is how we push back. They literally cannot. They don't have enough resources to enforce all of their edicts against us. And so we need strong state government, governors and leaders to push back. This is how we win. This is the original design of the founders. They thought the states should be the labs, right, of freedom, and every state should be really different. And we fight for free market. We are resilient. We must hold our state accountable. I won't go into all of the obstacles. Let me ask the question, is the Texas government too big?
Yes.
Yes. So we have a $321 billion biennial budget, largest spending increase in state history past this last go round. And so we need a change in thinking. We have to bring back the idea of fiscal conservatism. Okay. We had this in the beginning of the Tea Party wave. If y'all remember, taxed enough already, right? This is what it was. But somewhere around 2016, we moved to populism, and we have completely forgot that the size of government can only do what we fund it to do. Right. And so if we keep funding the government and it grows to out of control rates, then it's going to be able to oppress us with that added value and power. And so we need to stop maintaining the status quo. Okay, it's not a winning strategy. Conservatives can't accept preventing bad laws as a win. We have to actively repeal laws, actively shrink the size of government, radically slash budgets and regulation, hold lawmakers accountable. This is why Texans for Fiscal Responsibility exists. I'll show you this. Y'all ever... This is an AI generated. I did this on AI just to see how scary it's getting. These are our 4 taxpayer champions in the House. This is Representative Matt Schaefer, Tony Tinderholt, Steve Toth, and Brian Harrison. And so this is how I honored them. I turned them into patriots. And so that is it, y'all. Understand that...